welcome to the Rock is George podcast, episode 14. I'm your host, George Dion. You can check me out at rockisgeorge.com. You can check out previous podcast episodes at anchor.fm/rockisgeorge. We're streaming on all major podcasting platforms. And you can check out my album reviews and heavy metal interviews at metalexpressradio.com. Welcome back. If you've listened to the previous episodes, the Rock is George podcast is about rock music, whiskey, pop culture, and nostalgia. And I gotta tell you, I have an interview for you that punches almost every ticket. Think about when you were growing up. Think about some of the great movies that you watched. Think about some of the great movie soundtracks that you listened to. If you're in my age group, 40 to 50, the definitive movie soundtrack was Rocky IV. And I'd say one of the most popular movies for that age group was Rocky IV. It was the classic battle between good and evil, between the USA and those evil Russians. It pretty much had everything you look for in an action movie. It had action, it had heart, it had a kick-ass soundtrack. And today, I have an interview with the person responsible for that soundtrack, Vince DiCola. Vince didn't just do the Rocky IV soundtrack, sticking in the same age group category. He also did the soundtrack to the Transfomers movie, the animated film from the 1980s, specifically 1986. Before that, Vince did the Stayin' Alive soundtrack. That was Sylvester Stallone's directorial debut. It was the sequel to Saturday Night Fever, starring John Travolta. Is that where Vince DiCola got the Rocky IV job? Because of his work with Sylvester Stallone? I think you'd be surprised on the answer to that. I don't want to give too much away, but I do want to plug Vince's latest album, Only Time Will Tell. It's a compilation of songs that Vince composed over the years with various other singers and performers. He has songs on there with Steve Walsh from Kansas. He has songs on there with members from his past groups. We talk all about it. We talk about the songs, who appeared on what. We talk about Stayin' Alive. We talk about Rocky, the Transformers, Vince's work in video games, what he's doing today as far as TV and composing. This is a fantastic interview. It's a little on the long side, but I could have talked to Vince for another 2 hours easily. So without further ado, here's Vince DiCola. I ask everybody the same question to start out. If I knew absolutely nothing about Vince DiCola, how would you describe your music to me?
Wow, that's a big question there. It varies depending on what project I'm doing, but I would say the root of my musical interest and direction is progressive rock, followed closely by film music. But I also am a songwriter, so I write pop songs, as is evidenced on this new record of mine called Only Time Will Tell. But yeah, I would say progressive rock, is the base of most of the stuff that I do.
I'd absolutely agree with that. And you mentioned your new album, Only Time Will Tell, that was released through Escape Music. Is this sort of a sequel to Invincible as far as musical stylings go?
Actually, I never thought of it, but it is. It's a good follow-up to Invincible. Some of the same songs are on it. Of course, it's been remastered. This is the next step in and certainly getting things out of the vault for me is a big thing. These songs have been sitting around for a long time. And somebody commented to me yesterday that even though they were done in different studios with different artists and musicians, it sounds cohesive, and that's something that we strive for in the mastering. And I think they got it just right with that. So, yeah, this is a worthy follow-up to Invincible.
You said these songs have been sitting around for a little while. Had you tried releasing them before, or were there just aspects of it where you're like, I need to finish this at some point?
They were finished. I think, I submitted them for different projects, and they for one reason or another. They mostly were film projects, and for one reason or another, they did not get accepted. But that didn't affect my love for the songs and my hope that one day they would be released. And thanks to Khalil at Escape Records, they're finally out, and I'm so happy.
I think one of the great aspects of this album is that you do have a lot of special guests, and the song kind of reflects what they do in their main musical venture.
Yes. So much like Jason Sheff with Chicago and Steve Walsh with Kansas specifically.
Absolutely. And if you don't mind, let's kind of go through the album song by song and talk about kind of how it all came together, if you don't mind.
Good. Not a problem.
Let's talk about Bound and Gagged, that features Rick Livingston. He was previously in a project with you called Storming Heaven. So yeah. I'm assuming this either came out of those sessions or you guys worked on it shortly thereafter.
This was done, actually, this is probably the most recent of all the material on the record. This was done in 2007, and it was submitted for the first live-action Transformers movie. And they, by the time we actually got up the ladder to Michael Bay, they had kind of finished putting the album together. And I'm not sure they liked the song enough to put it in the movie anyway. I wish they would have, because I thought it would have been great for that particular movie. But that's why that song was written. That's the project it was originally submitted for.
While we're on Michael Bay in the first Transformers movie, Stan Bush had told me a similar story of trying to get the touch into the first Transformer movie, and it seemed like Michael Bay just wasn't having any of the kind of nostalgia stuff there.
That's right. And, that was a disappointment to both of us. I think I mistakenly made the assumption when I saw that they were going to make a live action Transformers movie that I would be at least called to contribute something to the music because of my history with the franchise. So, yeah, it was kind of a jolt that we were completely rejected. The reasoning was, Michael Bay did not want any of the elements from the 1986 movie. I can understand that to a certain point. I certainly would not have written the same kind of music for the movie as I did the live action movie as I did for the animated movie. But yeah, it was a disappointment that we didn't get anything in any of the live action movies.
So while we're talking about Transformers and Stan Bush, Stan makes an appearance on the song "She's My Last Mistake." If you want to talk about how that came together.
Yeah, that wasn't actually written for any specific project. That was just, I was in a pop mode back in the late '80s after I did the movie work, and I was always a big fan of David Foster and his songwriting, and I kind of. I used that that was very influential to me. So She's My Last Mistake was one of several songs that I wrote at the time with different lyricists. Specifically, that one was written with Roger Voudouris, and there's, I think, 5 songs on the album that Roger wrote the lyrics to, which is why I dedicated the record to him. But, I loved working with Roger. He was one of the very few. Actually, Rick Livingstone and Roger Voudouris were the 2 lyricists I've worked with who, when I would give them a piece of music, the lyric would come back within a few days and there would be no changes needed. And, She's My Last Mistake was one of those. Roger did a great job. So, yeah, that wasn't written for any particular project. It was just part of a group of songs that I wanted to record.
With Just Hanging On, it features Ellis Hall of Tower of Power, and you guys previously worked together in a prog rock trio called Thread,
right,
which also included Joanne Perry, if I'm pronouncing that right,
sure,
who was also in Storming Heaven,
yeah,
and Jethro Tull. So I'm assuming because you guys had this background together, that's sort of how this song came to be.
First of all, you pronounce Doan's name as Doan Perry. Everybody gets it wrong, so it's no problem. But yeah, Ellis and I and Doan worked in Thread. Again, this goes back to the pop thing versus the progressive thing for me. And Just Hanging On was not meant to be a follow-up for a Thread record. It was just another pop song that I had in my mind that I gave to Ellis, and it was right up his alley stylistically. And we wrote 2 songs together at that time, and I think the second song is going to be actually out as a bonus track on the Japanese version of this record. It's called Come the Night. But yeah, Alice is one of my favorite people, one of my favorite artists, and he just did an amazing job. Not only did he write the words and sing it, but he played bass and guitar as well, and I just love the guy.
Steve Walsh makes an appearance on 3 different songs. Steve Walsh from Kansas and Streets. I'm assuming this came out of the Invincible recording sessions, possibly?
No, actually, this came as a result of a phone call that I made, or actually a letter that I sent to Steve's manager at the time. I think it was Bud Carr. And I wrote this music, I think it was either late 80s or early 90s. And I had his voice in mind, but I didn't know anything about him. I didn't know how to get to him. I just took a shot in the dark and got through to his management, who offered to forward a tape to Steve. And I didn't really expect to hear anything. You know, I just kind of threw it out there and not forgot about it, but I went on to other things. And, you know, not too long after I sent the package, Steve called me personally and said how much he loved the 2 songs that I sent. And I didn't have any lyrics. I don't write lyrics, but Steve said, I would love to write the words, and I would love to sing this, and I would love to come out and hang out in your studio and just have some fun. And he spent a month here in my studio, and we did 3 songs, 2 songs of which I wrote the music to. The third song, which was from his band Streets, that he asked me to rearrange, a song called Broken Glass. So the songs first appeared. Only time will tell. First appeared on Invincible, but it was done substantially before that.
Okay. You got Bobby Kimball of Toto. I couldn't really find the connection between you and Bobby in the past, so I'm assuming this may have come with a phone call as well.
Well, I'll tell you, there's an interesting connection. Bobby and a friend of his were in Bobby's home state of Louisiana. And they were, the way Bobby explained it to me later, they were going down the road and they were listening to a CD, and the CD happened to be Thread. And I guess Bobby really, really went to town to try and get in touch with me. And he found some mutual acquaintance, and he was just full of compliments and praise for the Thread record. And he offered to do anything he could to help get that record out there. And he became a very good friend of mine. And of course, he's an amazing singer. I always felt that he was the sound of Toto vocally. And it was such an honor to work with him. And especially on that song, you know, Bobby wrote the main part of that song. I only wrote the instrumental outro to it, but we did that in one take in my studio. And it was so inspirational to me to play piano with Bobby that it just inspired me to do the best performance that I could do. And I'm so happy with that, how it turned out. Bobby sings his butt off on that song. He wrote great lyrics for the song. And I was honored to be sitting beside him in my studio when he was recording the vocal, and I could have a chance to accompany him.
The song sounds great. Bobby Kimball sounds great. Everything sounds great on that song. I agree with you there. And such a consummate singer, Bobby with Toto. I kind of agree. I wish he was kind of still part of it, but
me too.
You know how that goes.
I do.
Jason Sheff of Chicago appears on Miracles. I thought this song sounded very Chicago-esque.
And it was meant to. It was actually submitted for one of the Rocky movies, I think it was Rocky Balboa. You know, being that David Foster was very involved with Chicago and wrote, he's basically the guy responsible for bringing that band back into existence on the radio. And that was my foundation. That was the source of inspiration for me to write that song. I wrote it specifically with Chicago in mind, hoping that, having Jason sing it personally would help sell the song to Sylvester Stallone. But by the time we got the song to him, the reasoning that came back was that the soundtrack was all done and they had no more slots open at the time. After having heard the soundtrack to Rocky Balboa, I believe it was just rehashed material from all the other Rocky movies. So I really wish he would have accepted that song. I think it would have been a hit, especially if Chicago had done it. But I had worked with Jason prior to that in a band with a singer named Alex Lidgertwood, who was the singer for Santana for quite a while. And Jason plays bass amazingly well. And we played a lot of local club gigs with Jason playing bass, me playing keyboards, Alex singing, Jason singing. And luckily, I got to know him. It wasn't just a cold call like it was with Steve Walsh. I had gotten to know Jason fairly well before I asked him to record Miracles with me. And once again, I'm honored. What a great singer.
Absolutely. To this point, we've discussed mainly singers that you brought on that are known for their adult contemporary rock or radio rock friendly guys. Living in a Dream has Mark Bowles, and I thought that was a nice little twist to bring him on. He's a great vocalist, mainly known for heavy metal and hard rock. How did that come about?
Somebody mentioned to Doan Perry and myself that Mark would be maybe a good singer for Thread when we were looking for a singer. And when I heard the heavy metal stuff that he was doing, I thought, well, something's not making sense here. But the person that turned me on to Mark said, no, you got to realize he's got a whole other side to him that you need to hear. He's an amazing singer. He said, my friend just said, get him over your studio, let him sing one song. And as an audition, we had Mark come in and actually write a song with me called Living in a Daydream. And he wrote the words, he sang it, he played bass, he played guitar. And I think the reason that we decided on Ellis Hall instead of Mark was not because we think Ellis is a better singer, but there was a rub with Ellis that wasn't, Mark was sort of the expected sound for progressive rock at that time, whereas Ellis was an R&B singer, and that's his influence. And we wanted to kind of merge these styles in a way that hadn't been merged before. So it wasn't a matter of not liking Mark's voice. I actually love Mark's voice. And in fact, Khalil has offered to re-release the Thread record. I don't know how much of this we can talk about, but there's going to be a bonus track on that record that Mark sings. And I'm a big fan of his singing now. I love it.
Absolutely. Very, very underrated, Mark Bowles.
Absolutely.
Even in the heavy metal stuff he does, I mean, beyond Ingy Malmsteen, just the Ring of Fire stuff that he did, I just couldn't believe how good it was.
Yep.
No Risk, No Glory has Bob Reynolds appearing. I couldn't find out much about Bob.
There's not much yet to find out about him. He has his own band, and I think they just got a record deal recently. Bob was a connection that I made with my partner, Kenny Meredith, my composing partner that I've been working with for over 3 decades. And when I wrote that song and we put the track together, I was trying to think of a good vocalist, and Kenny recommended Bob, and Bob came in and just knocked it out. And I got along so well with Bob musically and personally, and so much so that when I did my live shows, I chose Bob to be the main vocalist. And what a powerhouse singer, and what a great performance he did on that song.
Absolutely. You're no slouch yourself, Vince. You sing on 3 songs. Carla, I'm Not in Love for Nothing and You're Not Alone. Any pressure to kind of be in these singers' realms when you're normally known for keyboards and sequences?
Well, I mean, in cover bands in my early days, I did sing. I did a lot of singing, and started singing like Billy Joel stuff back in the back in the 70s, and that was sort of my style. And I really was influenced by the group Three Dog Night, and I love that style of singing. But as I grew older and came out here to California, I shifted from that. I shifted more towards keyboards and more towards songwriting. And it got to the point, especially when I started using all these amazing singers, where I kind of just backed off and just wanted to contribute every now and then. And I have to say, on "I'm Not in Love for Nothing," which is another Roger Vidor's great lyric, I'm really proud of that. That's, to me, my favorite vocal of any vocal performance that I've done. And I arranged and sang all the background vocals on that as well. And I went for a very Beatlesque harmony approach. And I'm really, really happy with that. The other songs that I sang with Ellis and Roger, "You're Not Alone Tonight" and "Carla," that was actually a group that we were thinking of putting together called 333. And it was going to be a group with sort of spiritual message, but not knocking people over the head with it. And the three of us had a good blend together. And I really didn't have to sing. With those two great singers, it wasn't necessary for me to sing, but they encouraged me to be a part of it. So, I sang a few lines in each song, and I love the approach that we took with different lead singers, switching off.
Yeah, absolutely. I was like, this can't just be Vince in some of the songs where you guys are kind of blended together.
Right, right. I don't have that kind of range. Yeah, Ellis has got unbelievable range, and it was just a good pairing of vocal. Again, it was adapting, I should say, the sort of Three Dog Night approach with three different singers that interact with each other really well, especially when we harmonize. And that was a big influence to me. So I'm really happy I got a chance to do those few songs with Ellis and Roger.
Besides any re-releases of the past, are you working with Ellis or any of these other artists on any other projects currently?
I have not worked with Ellis for a long time. In fact, the person that I have written and collaborated with the most recently on that record is Rick Livingstone. And we have a band called Saga Star that made its debut when I played the Whiskey A Go-Go in 2018. And because of everybody's schedule and other obligations, it's just been taking forever to get this record finished. But we have a record with Rick singing lead, our friend Bobby Giannetti playing bass, and a great drummer named Victor St. John. And unfortunately, Victor moved to Maine about 3 years ago, and Rick just moved to Florida about 6 months ago. So there's only half the band remaining out here, but we want to finish the recording. We have 2 hours worth of material, and basically it's progressive rock. It's not nearly as progressive as like Emerson, Lake and Palmer or Yes. It's more along the lines of, if you know this group, a group called Porcupine Tree and an artist named Steve Wilson.
Oh yeah.
It's more in that realm of progressive rock. It's more accessible than something like Emerson, Lake and Palmer would be today. But we have 6 songs that average 20 minutes each, and it's 2 hours of material. And we have some of the tracks. We have the basic tracks recorded, and it's just a matter of finding the time to get the record finished. But of all the singers on the record, Rick is the one I've worked with the most, and probably, most recent, and probably will be the singer that I work the most with coming up here in the next couple of years.
Excellent.
Mm-hmm.
Only time will tell is kind of a limited release as far as physical copies go. You're only releasing 1,000 copies. I mean, obviously, this is because the way that the industry works today.
Yes, yes, and you know it's unfortunate. I mean, when it went from LP to CD, it was unfortunate in my mind because I miss the big format, you know, the big visual format. So you know, when it went to say when CDs came into being, it was a little bit of a disappointment. Although everybody said, "Oh, well, the sound is better and it doesn't get scratchy," you know, yeah, I know that, but I think there's still a superior sound to a well-recorded LP compared to a CD. But yeah, you know, CDs have now they're going out of fashion, and
And LPs are coming back.
the LPs are coming back. And in fact, Khalil was talking about possibly making this album into an LP, which I hope really comes to fruition because I would love to see it, love to hear it. But yeah, I guess you know people. I don't know the relationship. Maybe you know better than I do, but the digital streaming format seems to be the main format that everybody's using, downloading and streaming, which you know that's very convenient and it's a cool thing, but doesn't compare to the experience for me of sitting down with either an LP or a CD and looking at the lyrics or looking at the credits while I'm listening. But yeah, it's great that this record is available in, excuse me, in those two formats at least, and hopefully it will come out on LP within the next year.
That'd be excellent. And I think that as far as, consumption of music, certainly younger people rather just have it in their pocket everywhere they go, something like that. But I mean, older guys like myself, I just started getting back into vinyl. It's been great. I love it. I think it's sort of like, the music when you were younger is sort of like what sticks with you for the rest of your life. So I kind of like having that thing in my hand as well.
Yeah.
But I'll use streaming to kind of preview it now.
Sure, which is a great idea.
All right, so let's hit the time machine a little bit, so to say.
Okay.
Let's go back to where you kind of cut your teeth, at least out in the populace or the pop culture. You started with the Staying Alive soundtrack in 1983. This, of course, ties you to Sylvester Stallone.
Right.
You worked with his brother Frank Stallone on 3 tracks. How did you get that gig?
Well, let me backtrack a little bit to when my wife and I moved out here in 1981. I moved out here not to pursue anything, any music having to do with film. No thoughts of writing for film, songs or score. I came out to LA to be a session musician, and I did some sessions, and I got hooked up with some very nice and very good producers and songwriters, and but everything changed when I met Frank, and that was in I think 1982. So I actually made my first big connection within a year of moving to California, which is pretty rare for people. And I was playing in a cover band in a nightclub, and Frank came in just to check me out because he was looking for keyboard players. He was looking for somebody to accompany him on some local gigs, just like as a duo. He wanted it to be the format of him on guitar and singing, and a keyboard player who also sings, and just the two of us. And I got the gig with Frank. I went over to his house shortly after meeting him at that club and listened to his material, got to know him a little bit, and we got on very well with each other. So we started, actually I relished the time that I spent with just the two of us out playing clubs. It was very intimate. It was the first time in my life, in my career, that I played in a situation where there wasn't the focus on dancing. It was the focus on listening to music, and I loved that. So we did that for a few months, and then Frank decided that he wanted to ramp up to a full band, a full rock band with a drummer and a bass player and a guitar player and Frank and myself. And his brother, Sylvester, had arranged for us to rehearse on the MGM lot out here. And, again, if you can imagine a kid coming from the East Coast, a small town in the East Coast, all of a sudden I'm driving on these movie lots and rehearsing in a soundstage and, with Sylvester Stallone's brother. And it was surreal. It was a very, very enjoyable experience. And, one day, and I didn't know that this was going to happen, but Sylvester showed up at the rehearsal with his entourage. This was 1982. And I'm trying to think when in the timeline this was. I think it was around the time of Rocky III. It was either in production or he'd just come out. So he was, this huge star. And of course, I loved him in Rocky I. That's one of my favorite movies. And I loved the story behind how he held out for, him starring in it. And, it was just a great story all around. So he was a hero of mine. And to finally meet him in person was a thrill. And he was very cordial. But that was the day that he kind of took Frank into a corner and told him about this new movie that he had just signed on to direct and write that was going to be the sequel to Saturday Night Fever. And after that rehearsal, Frank came over to me and he told me about this opportunity. And he said, Vince, he said, because it's my brother, I'm one of the first people to hear about this in town. And, Sly cannot show favoritism, obviously, to me, but he did say, if you want to write some songs, we will definitely listen to them. There's a committee of people that have to decide whether the songs are right for the movie. But Frank offered me the opportunity to write with him. And we actually wrote 5 songs first, 2 with a gentleman named Joe Esposito, who's a phenomenal singer. He was part of the background singers for Donna Summers. And Frank had known Joe for a while. He brought Joe into the writing collaboration. And the 3 of us wrote 2 songs. And then Frank and I together alone wrote 3 other songs. And so we had a total of 5 songs. And Frank paid for us to go in a studio. And this was my first experience in a big professional recording studio scenario. And I loved that, of course. But we spent 2 days in the studio recording these songs. And when Frank took them over to his brother, his brother's first reaction was that he hated all 5 songs. He despised them. He didn't think, not only did he not think they were right for the movie, he just did not like the songs. And that was, of course, one of those so close yet so far situations for me. We almost, in my mind, I almost made it there. I was very close to getting something in a major movie with a major director, a major star. So it was a major disappointment when Frank gave me that information. However, I credit Frank with not giving up. And he called me a few days later and said, can we try one more song? Can we try one more idea? And he said, I don't have any musical idea in mind. I do have a concept. And the concept is a rock song with some theatrical elements to it. Has to be up-tempo, has to be energetic. And would you mind if we got together in your studio, your garage studio, and just, spend an afternoon, see if we can come up with something with using those parameters as a backdrop. And I said, well, you know what? I didn't hold out any hope that it was going to turn into anything or have any good results based on what happened with these first 5 songs. But it wasn't like, I knew I had nothing to lose. It was just time. It was just an afternoon. So anyway, long story short, we ended up writing this idea in 30 minutes and recorded it onto a little boombox that Frank had brought over. And what we had was me playing piano, and we only had like a verse and a chorus. And Frank didn't even have any lyrics. He had some melodic ideas. And Frank said, let's record this. Let's just record the verse and the chorus and maybe do another verse and the chorus. And I'll hum along a little bit and we'll record it to cassette on this little boombox. And we did. And Frank says, I'm going to take this over to my brother tonight. And I said, I begged him not to do that because I said, Frank, the first 5 songs that we handed in to your brother were done in a professional recording environment. And Frank said, well, as much as I'd love to do that for this song, I've kind of run out of money because he paid for the recordings out of his own pocket. And he says, I know my brother well enough to know that when he hears this song or this idea, he'll be able to say we're headed in the right direction and we should finish it or we shouldn't do anything with it. And once again, Frank took off to go over to his brother's, and I did my best to divert my attention from waiting for him to call with any kind of results. And that night, and I'm telling you all this for a reason, George. It was a big turning point in my career. That night, I took my wife Beth out to dinner, and when we got back, we had this little ancient white AT&T answering machine. And when we got home, the little message light was blinking, and I pressed play, and out of this little machine comes Sylvester Stallone's voice. And he said, Vinny, home run. Love this idea. Can't wait to hear the song when it's finished. And that song ended up being Far From Over. And that was the big hit from Staying Alive. I think it got more airplay than any other songs, even the Bee Gees material on that soundtrack. And it changed the whole course of our involvement with the movie, because when Sylvester accepted Far From Over into the movie, everybody, John Travolta, Cynthia Rhodes, the choreographers, everybody was so happy. That was the type of song that they were missing from all the other artists. And they were so happy that a few days after that, Frank called me and he was chuckling. He said, you're never going to believe this, but my brother listened again to the first 5 songs that we submitted, and he took all of them into the movie. So that was a big, big turning point for me. That's why I wanted to tell that whole story. I enjoy telling that story. I've told it many times because that was a major turning point for me. And we ended up, I think, with 7 songs in that movie, 3 of which made it onto the soundtrack record. But of course, that's what led to a few years later, the opportunity to score Rocky IV.
That's an excellent story. We're going to be getting to Rocky IV in a second. I just wanted to ask, had you and Frank Stallone collaborated since the soundtrack?
We haven't. I think it's because I got more into scoring as opposed to songwriting. And, I will always be grateful to Frank for bringing me into the fold and introducing me to not only his brother, but the whole, film area of the music business. But yeah, I kind of, after Staying Alive, I kind of got away again from songwriting and especially when I had the opportunity to score Rocky IV, I kind of switched gears. And it's not that I, have refused to work with Frank or anything like that. It's just that I haven't been in that frame of mind. So I don't know, maybe someday we'll write again together. Especially with this new album, I got back into songwriting mode and fixed those songs up, from a pop song standpoint. So there is still a part of me that loves that format, but I've been so busy at scoring video games with my partner Kenny and enjoying that. And we've just signed on to a new TV program that's coming out in Europe, actually in Germany next year. And I'm enjoying the instrumental score side, and maybe it'll oscillate between songs and scoring again at some point. But right now, my focus has been on scoring. So yeah, I don't know if and when Frank and I will ever collaborate again, but certainly grateful for all he did for me.
Rockish George here, breaking in with the Rockish George podcast Whiskey Break. Today we got Booker's Bourbon, This is sort of a bourbon for the advanced bourbon drinker because it's 63.20% alcohol. That's 126.4 proof. This bourbon is aged 6 years, 4 months, and 21 days. It is the first release in 2020 called Granny's Batch. Each Booker's that they release, I believe they release 3 or 4 a year. They each have their own little name and story behind it. The aging is a little different from bottle to bottle. And Booker's is kind of a sought-after bourbon because of its high proof and its scarcity. And if you can find it, I'd snatch it up. It's around $80. It's definitely one that you really want to pour over ice, or at least for me, unless you can handle 126 proof. So we're going to try a little bit here without ice and see what we get. You know, right off the nose, you can smell the alcohol. It's pretty strong. You know, the bourbon has a very sweet flavor to it. It's got a little bit of a burn to it. It has a nice caramely taste, is what you like to see in a bourbon or a whiskey. It's light on the tongue. It's definitely got a bite. Did I say it's got bite? It's got bite. It's a strong bite. I prefer this over ice, even though I normally drink my bourbon straight, my whiskey straight, but it's really good when you can find it. I've had a couple of different batches. The flavors are different from batch to batch, so it's worth kind of having that adventure if you're looking for new things and stuff like that, or to even compare to one another. They call that a vertical tasting, I believe. So I'm not going to ramble on too long. $80 is the average price where you can find it. Doesn't matter which edition you get, you're going to get a quality bottle of bourbon. So let's get back to Vince DiCola. 1985 rolls along. You're on the Rocky IV soundtrack. You got several songs on it. It's sort of, at least in my age group, I'm 45, it's sort of the definitive soundtrack of that time. I think everybody knows every song on it. I think everybody knows the movie from like front to back, everything about it. I mean, these songs are in today's pop culture. They're spoofed by popular television shows, the training montage. I still get pumped up when I hear that. The war song, Hearts on Fire with John Cafferty. If you want to talk about a little bit about the time of putting all that together.
Well, that's another good story if you have the time.
I have plenty of time for you, Vince. You tell great stories.
Thank you. So the person that managed Frank Stallone, his name was Robin. His name still is Robin Garb, and Robin just also happened to be the music supervisor on many of the Stallone films, Rambo, all the Rocky movies, so that was another important connection with getting songs into Staying Alive. And after we did that movie and did those songs, I decided that I wanted to be managed by Robin as well. So he took me on as a client, and he got some gigs for me here and there. But it was 2 years after we did Staying Alive that he called me up one day and he said, "Listen," he said, "this is a very long shot, and I'm warning you about that. But I just found out that Bill Conti, there's going to be another Rocky movie, and Bill Conti and Sly had some kind of falling out. So they're going to be looking for somebody to score this movie." And, the whole time he's telling me this, I'm thinking, okay, what does this have to do with me? And he said, "I think that you should take a stab at this." And it was so surreal to me to hear him say that I said, "Robin, you've got to be kidding me. I had songs in Sylvester's movie, but that's a whole different ballgame. I've never scored a movie, and we're talking about, the fourth movie in one of the biggest movie franchises in the business, in the world." And I said, my first reaction was, "No, I don't think I can do that." And, Robin reiterated, he says, "Yes, it is a long shot, but what do you have to lose?" And he said, here's the thing. I'm going to know all the plot points pretty much before anybody else does. And I can feed you those plot points, and you can write and demo up some ideas. And at the time, my wife and I were living in a 1-bedroom apartment that had a den, and the den served as my studio, and very basic equipment. I was recording at the time on an old Fostex reel-to-reel tape player. And, Robin said, here's what I think we need to do. Here's the campaign idea. He said, let's pick 5 pieces of music. Let's target 5 pieces of music. It's a Rocky movie, so there's going to be a training scene in this movie. So write some training music, and just base it on what you know of the other Rocky movies. Don't imitate Bill Conti, do your own thing, but the kind of the format that it has to follow. I said, yes, I do, of course. I'm very familiar with all that. And he said, there's going to be a fight scene, so that's going to be song number 2. And he says, I can tell you that there's going to be the death of a main character in this movie. So he said, I want you to write something intense, intense and sad, as he put it. And then the other 2 songs, he said, there's going to be some tender moments between Rocky and Adrian. And, it's probably just going to call for piano and strings. So just put some ideas together with, a synthesizer doing the string parts or whatever. And that was the 5, sort of ideas that Robin had. And I took that information. And the great thing about the whole process for me was I was convinced that I was not going to get this gig. And in a way, that was very freeing, because I didn't have my hopes up, nor did I have anybody breathing over my shoulder saying, well, you got to make it this way, you got to make this change, whatever. It was, I had the opportunity to just have fun, and it was a learning exercise for me. And that's how I looked at it. No matter what happened, this was going to be my first opportunity to try and score a movie. And, but the whole time through it, I was convinced that it was never going to come to fruition. So I got together with a friend of mine from Louisiana named Ed Frugier, and Ed had a very nice professional recording studio in Louisiana. And we had gotten to know each other because he was also in a band out in LA at the time. And when I told him about this opportunity, he said, well, why don't you come over to Louisiana and let's record a really good demo over there? And he said, I know some of the musicians and the head of the music department at a local university here. Maybe we could get them involved and really make an impressive demo to play for Sylvester Stallone. And I absolutely took Ed up on that offer and went over to Louisiana for a week or so. And we created these great demos of Training Montage and War, and what ended up being the Death of Apollo Creed. The other 2 songs, the tender moments, I just did in my own studio with what I had, and that was sufficient. We could not get the string section from the university for some reason. I can't remember why, but we were able to get the brass and percussion, and we made use of that for Training Montage and War, of course. So anyway, we got this demo finished, and I played it for Robin. Robin says, this is phenomenal. He said, now it's down to me finding the right time to present this to Sly. And the way he told the story to me later, he found a day and a couple minutes while Sylvester was in his trailer alone on the set. And Robin had this old, I don't know if you remember, there was a cassette player called a Walkman, a Sony Walkman.
Yes.
And it was great for the time, and the only format we had to present to Sylvester at that time was a cassette tape. So Robin brought his Sony Walkman into the trailer and a pair of headphones. And he said, Sly, I want you to sit in a chair. And he stuck these headphones on his head. And he says, I want to play something for you. And Sly says, well, what am I listening to? And Robin says, I'm not going to tell you. I just want you to listen. And the first piece on that tape just happened to be training Montage. And within 30 seconds, as Robin puts it, Sylvester jumped out of his chair and he said, "Who the F is this?" And Robin said, that's Vince DiCola. And Sly's reaction was, "Oh, you mean Vinny, the guy that wrote with my brother for Staying Alive?" And Robin said, "Yes." And right then and there, Sly said, "Sign him up. He's got to score this movie." And, you can imagine when Robin called me to give me that news, how surreal that was. I mean, here it was months of preparing, never believing that I would even have a chance at this. And all of a sudden, I'm told that I have the job. And it was amazing, but it was also very scary for me. I'd never scored a movie before. I knew what I knew how big this was going to be, and I was intimidated. I was overwhelmed with how am I going to do this? But I just, luckily, the music that I had written up to that point ended up being accepted as the main themes to the movie. So it was just a matter of recording them and adapting the arrangements to fit the picture. So I had a head start on that. And the way that campaign flowed was, it could not have gone any smoother. It could not have gone better than it did. And then I went on to do the rest of the score. And it was, I think, 37 minutes of music. I think I had upwards of 3 months to do that. And I found out that was a luxury, because when I ended up doing Transfomers, which I know we'll talk about later, I had to do 70 minutes of music and had to write and deliver it and master it and submit it within 6 weeks. So, looking back from that point on Rocky IV, I really had it good. And the other thing, the other advantage that I had that most composers that are starting out never get this opportunity, was I was invited to the mixing stage, and I was given a say in how the music was mixed into the movie, and it was really an amazing collaborative effort. And man, I'm so thankful to Sylvester Stallone for giving me that chance. A nobody, basically. And in fact, the folks who were putting together the ads for television and the newspapers didn't want to put my name in, because their reasoning was, well, this isn't going to attract anything to the movie. We don't know who Vince DiCola is. And I have to credit Sylvester Stallone with making a call and fixing that and saying, you put his name in the paper. He does, he's done the music. He's done great music. He's just he's an important part of this movie. So it was Sylvester Stallone himself that got, that got my name in the advertisements. And I'm to this day, I'm eternally grateful to him for giving me that shot.
And like I said, it's a soundtrack that still endures, especially Rocky fans that grew up with it. Just the music that's inspiring. I think it's one of those things that if you saw the movie, the music was just burned into your brain as well.
Well, of course, at the time, I didn't know how iconic it was going to be. I felt I'd be lucky if the music was given any interest at all, based on the fact that it was not Bill Conti. And I'm sure there were people that their interest waned because of that. They didn't really want to hear anything but Bill Conti's music. And I really worked hard to incorporate enough of Bill's style and approach into my score, but yet I also made it a point to make my own mark on the score. And the main way I did that was to incorporate more of the rock elements and bring more of the rock elements to the forefront, as opposed to an orchestral driven score. And, at the time, the real big Phil Collins drum sound was just coming into popularity, and I wanted that sound for part of the score as well. So, I still had the brass fanfare, normal rocky Bill Conti thing, but I also brought this sort of rock, and I have to say even some progressive rock elements into the score. And to be honest with you, as I was submitting this material, and when I wrote it, and I knew that Robin was going to be playing it for Sylvester, my first thought was, I'm going way too far into progressive rock for this, and it's probably going to be too much for the movie. So I was just so pleased and amazed when the comments started coming in, specifically about Training Montage, which is one of the busiest, most dense pieces of music in film up to that point. And I just didn't think it would get over, but he loved that piece, and from there, he loved war and all that stuff. And I was very, very fortunate in that I got away with things that I didn't expect to get away with musically. Yeah.
The Transformers the movie soundtrack came out in 1986, and I'm gonna go on a limb here and say that it was the Rocky IV soundtrack was released on Scotty Brothers, and so was the Transformers movie soundtrack. So was it the label that got you this particular gig?
No, it was actually the producers of the movie of Transformers approached me because they loved the score to Rocky IV, and they thought that the style that I wrote in would be perfect for their movie. And I didn't really make the connection. And this was another surreal experience for me because I was way past the age of, playing with toys. And I really had very little knowledge of the Transformers franchise at the time. I wasn't aware that there was a TV show. I didn't know anything about the toys. It was a word that I kind of heard on every now and then, like Hasbro. You hear that name a lot when it came to toys and products related to toys. So I knew nothing. I knew very little about Transformers when I was approached. And as they were telling me the storyline, I thought, well, how are they hearing the connection between Rocky IV and this, animated robot movie? But I think it was the main, good versus evil theme, the underdogs, being able to come out on top. And I was grateful to them for making that connection, because I did not make that connection. And they asked me to put a piece of music together as a demo, as an audition. And they said, look, we're not going to give you any direction other than, put a good guy, for lack of a better description, a good guy theme, a bad guy theme, incorporate some battle music, incorporate some peace after the war, sort of thing at the end of the piece, and just do what you want to do based on those parameters. So I came up with this 6-minute piece of music that ended up being called Legacy. And when they heard this piece, they said, you're absolutely right for this movie. We want you to score it. Oddly enough, I did not end up using any of the music from that piece in the movie. It just didn't work out that way. But, it got me the gig. And when Entrada Records put out the Transformers soundtrack, just the score, they decided to include Legacy on that because it was such an important part of the, getting me the gig for the score. And I'm grateful to them for doing that. And I'm really proud of that song. And when I perform live, I actually do that song. It's one of the more difficult pieces that I do with my band. But yeah, that project came to me as a result of the producers of the Transformers loving the score to Rocky IV and approaching me for that sole reason.
Transformers has kind of followed you through life. You have also done video game work for Transformers Devastation, and from what I understand, you've performed or at least appeared at some of the Transformers conventions. So what are these conventions? You meet some unique people there?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'll try to make this story brief, but as I said, I knew nothing about Transformers or very little when I was approached to do the movie. The movie, if you remember, came out and was in and out of the theaters in a week or two, I think, and it was considered a failure. And I'm not saying that I completely forgot about it, but it definitely, I was on to other things at that point. And it was not really a movie I could relate to because of my age. So I didn't give it much attention. And then 11 years later, I get a call from a gentleman named Glenn Hallett, who was the organizer of the first Transformers convention called BotCon. And Glenn was the gentleman who informed me and educated me about the popularity that this movie and my score had gained over the last 11 years. I had known nothing about this. And he said, well, I want you to come to Rochester, you and Stan. I want you guys to come to Rochester to this convention. And I'm going to show you how much attention your score has gotten and the music to the movie has gotten. So I remember Stan and I flying out to Rochester together. And when we approached the venue, it was a hotel where the convention was held. We noticed that a line of people coming out of the convention center, and it went around the building for about 2 blocks. And I remember saying to Stan, well, this is encouraging. This seems to be a pretty happening convention, pretty popular convention. Of course, there were people dressed up as different characters, and that was a bit surreal. I'd never seen that before. But then we got to meet Glenn for the first time, and we mentioned to Glenn, hey, congratulations on the attendance here. It looks great. He says, are you talking about the line out the door? I said, well, of course. He said, well, that's not just for the convention. That's mainly for you and Stan. And that's the fans of the music part of this movie. And I just remember feeling like I was on Mars or something. Both Stan and I were just caught completely off guard and in shock that this kind of attention was being given to this score that we had forgotten about. Both of us had kind of, I won't say forgotten about, but we put it into the back of our minds over the previous 11 years, never thinking that it really got any more attention. So we were amazed and very, very grateful when we met all these fans, and they showered us with praise for the music. And as a result, Stan and I both were invited to several Transformers conventions, and we actually performed at that first convention in 1997 in Rochester, New York, and have performed since then at maybe 3 or 4 of the Transformers conventions. So, it was another surreal experience for us.
I've actually interviewed Stan twice because I was a fan of his work in Transformers, and I'm still a fan of his work as he releases albums today. An underappreciated performer, I think, that unfortunately, I think because he was on the same label as Survivor, that he didn't get a fair shake.
He didn't get a fair shake. I agree with you. And I was so happy when he agreed to sing She's My Last Mistake on this new record that ended up on this new record, because that was the voice, after having worked with Stan, that's the voice I wanted for that song. And it was absolutely the best voice for it. And I'm so grateful to Stan for, allowing me to put that song and his performance on this record.
So since Transformers, you've been doing score work, you've been doing video games, you've been periodically releasing solo releases that kind of different genres here and there and all over the place. Is that kind of your main focus today with outside the Only Time Will Tell album? Do you focus on the video game scores? Are you still doing movie scores?
Haven't gotten an offer for a movie score in quite a while, but we have, when I say we, it's my partner Kenny and I. After we were approached to do Angry Birds Transformers video game, in 2011, I believe, they were so happy with the results that we handed in. I mean, they basically said, Vince, we want an updated version of what you did in 1986, but we want to keep those 80s elements, as much of those 80s elements as we can. And that venture was so successful that it attracted other video game producers and companies to come to us and say, hey, we would like you to do this game and that game. And that really started off my and Kenny's participation in the video game format. Something, again, that I had never expected or never aimed to be a video game composer. But when we worked on Transformers, Angry Birds Transformers, it was a good experience, and I've enjoyed the games that we've scored since then. And we have offers on the table at the moment to do some more video game scoring, but we're also very excited about a new TV project that I alluded to earlier, and it's called NR City Universe. And a gentleman named Marcus Liedtke from Germany is the producer and star of this. And right now, it's of course only a TV pilot, but hopefully it will get picked up for a series. And, it's sort of an NCIS type show. And NCIS meets martial arts, if you will. And this gentleman, Marcus, is a big fan of my work from Rocky and Transformers. And he reached out to me, told me the story about this thing, and said he'd really like to get us involved in this. So we've been working with him, developing this music for several months now. And, the pilot's not going to be released until sometime next year. There was, of course, many delays due to the pandemic. And Marcus didn't have a chance to fly over here as soon as he wanted. And there's a lot of connections here in LA that he's working with to make this project come to fruition. But, the point is, this is the first TV thing that Kenny and I have scored. And it's been really enjoyable. So I'm looking forward. I think my fans of my past work will really enjoy the style of music that we're doing, because there are elements of Rocky IV and Transformers. It's, of course, a different type movie, but Marcus specifically asked for elements of those scores to be involved. So it's nice to come on a project knowing that the producer and the star are asking you to come aboard based on your past work. You're not just somebody that they picked out of the cold and hey, let's try and work together. This was a collaboration that I think was really meant to happen. And I can't wait to share the music that we've already come up with my fans, but that won't be till next year. But the two focuses right now are video games and this TV show.
It all comes full circle, they say, right?
Absolutely.
One thing I wanted to ask you about before we end.
Yeah.
You worked with one of my favorite rock vocalists of all time, Glenn Hughes.
Oh my God.
You appeared on the Hughes Turner Project album in 2003, and you toured with Glenn when he was doing his Deep Purple show. Right. How did you get to know Glenn and end up touring with him?
I believe it was an engineer that was a mutual acquaintance, and Glenn was looking for a B3 player for one of his solo albums called Building the Machine. And Michael Scott was the engineer's name. And he said, Vince, would you be willing to come over to my studio where we're recording and just play a little bit on these songs just to see if it's a good fit? And of course, Glenn will be there and you'll get to meet him and get to know him a little bit. And we immediately hit it off musically. I think I did half of one song and Glenn said, I want you to do the whole record. And we fell into a really good relationship musically and personally. And he asked me back to do a couple other things, including the Hughes Turner project. And let's see, fast forward a number of years, and I found out that he was going to be doing this Deep Purple tour in 2019. It was going to be in England. It was 2018. I'm sorry, I get my dates mixed up. And I had never been to the UK. It was 2019. Excuse me. It was 2019. I'd never been in the UK and always wanted to go. And this was like a golden opportunity. And Glenn called me. He said, "Look, I know you haven't toured very much, but do you want to go out and play with me?" And it's only a 2-week tour. It'll be fun. You'll love the rest of the band that I have. They're really good musicians, and it might be an interesting experience for you. And I said, well, heck, why not? And I did not have I learned the songs and did not have a chance to play it with the band until the day of our first gig. At the sound check of our first gig was the first rehearsal I had with the band, and the first day that I actually met the other guys. And once again, we all hit it off well, and we did 9 dates over the period of 2 weeks. And unfortunately, the schedule was so busy that I didn't have a chance to do any sightseeing as I was hoping to do. And the little bit that I got to see was sort of out the window of a van that we were traveling in. But I'm going to go back there at some point. And I loved working with Glenn, and I loved specifically, sitting in the van next to him and hearing all his stories about his time with Deep Purple and all the artists that he's worked with. And he's just such a personable guy and fun to be around. He's a funny guy. And he loves to play. I mean, these sound checks, we got away from doing the sound checks just by jamming because Glenn loves to play. And, his manager had to say, Glenn, you got to stop because we have to get back to the hotel and we got to get dressed and all this stuff, get ready for the gig. So, I really related to Glenn on a musical level. And I was amazed when I went out and toured with him. It was my first tour with a major rock star. And I made the comment later that I was not used to playing a gig with a band, and when it comes time for me to do a solo, none of the eyes of the audience are on me. They're on Glenn. I wasn't used to that. It wasn't like I was disappointed. I was just caught off guard by that. And, Glenn said, don't worry about that. They're hearing what you do, and we're making tapes, and, your contribution is every bit as important as mine and everybody else's in the band. And he was really complimentary of my playing throughout the tour. And I didn't know he was going to do this, but at the end of the tour, in fact, his manager knew he was going to do this. So it was lucky for me that this was filmed. I didn't know it was being filmed. And Glenn made a big deal of introducing me to the audience. And he said, we were so lucky to get this guy who scores movies in Hollywood to come out and go on tour for a little bit with us. And we've had fun. And he's brought all his talent to bear for me on this project. And it's just been a blast. And he gave me this just wonderful introduction, the last gig, and have that on tape on my phone. And it's just very, very nice of Glenn to do that. So, yeah, it was a wonderful experience.
Sounds like you've had a lot of wonderful experiences, Vince, and I've had a great time talking to you. I really appreciate you taking the time to appear on the Rock is George podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I wish you the best of luck on your latest album, Only Time Will Tell. I'm crossing my fingers for a vinyl release because I would absolutely snag that up.
Oh, great. Me too. I'm looking forward to it. I hope it comes to fruition.
In the meantime, people can pick it up. It's streaming right now on most major streaming outlets, and Escape Music is selling the physical CD. And once again, I want to thank you for taking the time, man. I really learned a lot about you today, and it sounds like you've had a great musical career.
Well, thank you, George, again for having me on. I appreciate it. I love telling these stories, as you can tell, and I never get tired of it. So thanks for giving me the opportunity to do it again.
I just want to thank Vince DiCola once again for being on the Rock is George podcast. I think he's a guest that certainly fits the bill of rock music, whiskey, pop culture, and nostalgia. I had a great time talking to Vince. I could have talked for hours. Be sure to check out Vince's latest album, Only Time Will Tell, released through Escape Music Limited out of Canada. You can order physical copies direct from their website, or you can stream the album on all major streaming platforms. I want to thank Barry Kirtley of Escape Music for making this interview happen. You've been great. I've been George Dion, and I'll see you again soon.